The void swallowed their cries whole. Not the screams of battle, nor the final, desperate pleas of a dying world, but the long, drawn-out exhalations of a civilization losing its breath. They called it the Great Silence, the epoch when the star-spanning might of the Zykar Dominion descended upon the nascent interstellar reach of humanity. It wasn't a war of equals, it was an extermination, swift and brutal, a cosmic culling by an empire that viewed nascent species as little more than pests to be swept aside. The few that survived, those unfortunate enough to be deemed valuable assets or biological curiosities, were herded onto transport ships, bound for the deepest, darkest corners of Zykar space. Their home, Earth, became a forgotten mote, a blue marble scorched by orbital bombardment, its vibrant life snuffed out, leaving only a scar in the galactic tapestry, 1,000 light-years from any star humanity had ever named. The penal moon of Orlagnin hung like a pockmarked skull. In the blackness, its surface, a jagged landscape of obsidian spires and sulphurous vents, was bathed in the sickly green glow of the gas giant it orbited. Here, deep within the moon's crust, lay the Zykar's primary human containment facility, the Aegis Contempt. Its massive, reinforced gates, hewn from a metal denser than collapsed neutronium, pulsed with an indifferent energy field. Within its bowels, life was a cycle of automated labor, nutrient paste, and the ever-present hum of alien machinery, a sound that drilled into the very marrow of the human prisoners. Their days were measured not by sunrises, but by the rhythmic clanging of drills deep in the geothermal mines, extracting exotic minerals for the Zykar war machine. Captain Kaelen, a veteran of the First Contact War, stood on the observation deck of the Aegis Contempt, his multifaceted eyes scanning the rows of human figures toiling below. His chitinous armor, the color of polished obsidian, reflected the sterile glow of the chamber. Kaelen was a Zykar of the highest caste, his lineage tracing back to the architects of the Dominion's expansion. He saw not individuals, but units, numerical entries in a vast galactic ledger. The humans, with their soft, pliable skin and fragile bone structures, were a curiosity, an anomaly that had somehow managed to resist for a short, pathetic while. His mandibles twitched in what, for a Zykar, passed for amusement he'd witnessed. Their pathetic attempts at defense, their emotional outbursts, their desperate, uncoordinated charges. They were, in his estimation, glorified vermin. A low, guttural chuckle rumbled in his throat. He recalled the debriefings, the initial reports of human resilience. Such a ludicrous concept. Resilience against the Zykar was a child's tantrum against a collapsing star. He watched a human drone stumble, its thin frame trembling under the weight of a geode. The Zykar overseer, a hulking brute named Vork, barked a command, its voice a grating snarl. The human, gaunt and pale, righted itself. Its shoulders slumped, but its eyes. Kaelen's gaze narrowed. There was something in those eyes. Not defiance, not anger, but a deep, unsettling stillness. A void that mirrored the one that had consumed their home. He dismissed it as the dullness of prolonged suffering, the vacant stare of a broken creature. He moved on, his heavy strides echoing through the metallic corridors. He paused at another section where humans were sorting volatile compounds. The air here was thick with acrid fumes. One human, a woman, coughed, a racking, painful sound. Her hand, raw and blistered, moved with a methodical precision that belied her apparent exhaustion. She wasn't fast, but she was meticulous. Her movements economical, almost ritualistic. Kaelen's sensor suite registered a slight anomaly, a minuscule deviation in the compound's purity, so small it would be imperceptible to any but the most advanced scanners. He attributed it to human error, their inherent imperfection. Zykar. Efficiency, he mused, would never tolerate such sloppiness. He made a mental note to increase the processing speed quotas. That would break their spirit, surely. His personal guard, squad of elite Zykar warriors, moved in silent unison behind him, their heavy footfalls shaking the very deck plates. They, too, shared his contempt. They had seen the human worlds burn, witnessed their desperate, futile resistance. They had heard the human pleas, the cries for mercy, the whimpers of surrender. And they had answered with plasma and disinterest. The concept of human resilience was a joke whispered among the lower ranks, a punchline to a galactic tragedy. Kaelen found himself almost pitying them, not for their suffering, but for their pathetic inability to comprehend the vastness of the Zykar's might. Their continued existence, even in servitude, was a testament to Zykar efficiency, not human tenacity. Yet, a peculiar stillness permeated the human sections of Aegis Contempt. There were no overt rebellions, no desperate charges against armed guards, just a quiet, unending compliance that grated on Kaelen's nerves more than outright defiance ever could. It was like watching a machine, perfectly calibrated, but with a hidden, unidentifiable flaw. He ordered increased surveillance, double shifts, stricter punishments for even the slightest infraction. He wanted to see them break, to shatter their quiet resolve, to extinguish that unsettling stillness in their eyes. He wanted to hear their screams, real screams, not the muffled sounds of their dying world. He wanted proof of their weakness, their inherent frailty, proof that his initial assessment had been correct. He would squeeze them until their spirit was nothing but dust, and then, perhaps, the Zykar Dominion would finally be rid of the annoying whisper of human resilience. The thought was a satisfying hum within his hardened exoskeleton. His final stop was the medical bay, a sterile chamber, where injured humans were patched up just enough to return to labor. A young human, barely an adult, lay on a biobed, its legs shattered by a mining accident. Its eyes, wide and unfocused, stared at the ceiling. The Zykar medic, a dispassionate drone, worked with clinical precision. Kaelen observed the humans. Shallow breathing, the faint tremor in its hand. Weak species, indeed. He turned to leave, dismissing the pathetic sight. He failed to notice the human's other hand, hidden beneath the thin blanket, fingers subtly tracing a complex, almost geometric pattern onto the metallic surface of the bed. A pattern that would, to any Zykar observer, appear to be nothing more than an unconscious spasm. But to another human, it was a silent, desperate message, a single spark in the overwhelming darkness. A message of defiance, hidden in plain sight. A secret language forged in the crucible of their shared agony. Captain Kaelen's contempt for humanity was a deeply ingrained facet of his Zykar psyche. A prejudice honed by centuries of galactic dominance. He saw their quiet compliance, not as a terrifying discipline forged in the crucible of despair, but as the mute resignation of a broken species, as the stillness he'd observed, the vacant eyes, the methodical movements these were, to him, the hallmarks of utter defeat. He believed he had squeezed them, and they had yielded nothing but silence. This was the ultimate victory, he reasoned. Not just conquest, but the absolute extinction of their spirit. He doubled down on his assumptions. His orders rippled through the Aegis Contempt like a cold shockwave. Quotas for geothermal mineral extraction were increased by 1/3. Nutrient-paced rations were reduced, and the automated labor cycles extended. The rationale, explained to his subordinates, was simple: efficiency. Maximize output, minimize cost. But beneath the cold logic of Zykar economics lay a deeper, more primal desire to finally, definitively break them, to wring out the last vestiges of that irritating, tangible resilience and replace it with utter, pliant despair. The human prisoners, gaunter now, their movements even slower, complied. They descended deeper into the mines, their pickaxes, striking the obsidian rock with the dull, rhythmic thud of exhausted inevitability. They sorted the volatile compounds with blistered hands, their bodies swaying with fatigue. They consumed the meager rations, their faces impassive. Kaelen watched. From his observation decks, from the security feeds, from the reports filed by his overseers. And he saw precisely what he expected to see. A species pushed to its limits, clinging to the edge of extinction, incapable of anything but obedience. He missed the subtle shifts, the minute deviations from expected behavior. He missed the way. A human, ostensibly adjusting a faulty conduit, would linger for a fraction of a second too long, their fingers brushing against another's, conveying a precise sequence of taps. He missed the faint, almost inaudible hum of a voice, mimicking the rhythmic clanging of the automated drills. Canning a complex series of pulses within the ambient noise, a message passed from one mining section to another. He missed the way the injured human in the medical bay, his leg shattered. Wood, in the dead of the Zykar night cycle, meticulously etched the geometric patterns not just into the bedframe, but into the very fabric of his tattered uniform. Silent ledger of shared knowledge for the humans. Stripped of everything but their bodies and their minds, had forged a new language, born of necessity and suffering. It was a language of touch, of rhythm, of pattern. A flicker of the eyes, a specific way of stacking mineral samples, a deliberate misplacement of a tool that only another human would recognize as a directional marker. They were building a network, not of wires and circuits, but of shared understanding. A web woven from the invisible threads of their shared agony. Their stillness was not resignation, it was focus. Their compliance was not surrender, it was camouflage. They had learned the Zykar, they studied their routines, their rigid adherence to protocol, their absolute inability to perceive anything outside their own logical frameworks. The Zykar were creatures of efficiency, but also of blindness. They saw only the macro, the grand design, never the micro. It's the intricate dance of desperation unfolding beneath their very noses. They understood power, but not subtlety. They understood force, but not will. They understood conquest, but not resilience. And in this colossal oversight lay humanity's only infinitesimal chance, under the unblinking gaze of automated cameras. And in different Zykar guards, the humans developed their tactics. Sabotage was too risky, too overt. Direct rebellion was suicide. Their strategy was one of infinitesimal erosion, of microscopic subversion. They learned the Zykar's energy conduits, the patterns of their ventilation systems, the precise, almost imperceptible weaknesses in the automated machinery that kept Aegis's Contempt running. Not to break them, not yet, but to understand them, to map the veins and arteries of their prison. Captain Kaelen, oblivious to this silent war of attrition, continued his rounds. He saw a mining cart derail, a minor inconvenience quickly rectified by automated drones. He saw a ventilation unit malfunction, causing a temporary drop in atmospheric quality, attributed to the harsh conditions of vorlagnine. He saw a storage locker containing nutrient paste jam. It's a minor delay in distribution. All isolated incidents easily explained away as the inevitable wear and tear of a high-demand facility or the inherent clumsiness of the human workers. He chuckled, a low, grating sound, at the thought of human resilience. It was truly a joke. They were so fragile, so predictable, yet deep within the obsidian moon, the whispers continued. The geometric patterns spread, etched into rock faces during shifts, subtly pressed into the dust of the common areas, even woven into the crude, threadbare blankets provided to them. Each symbol, each tap, each glance carried layers of meaning. Instructions for precise movements, warnings of impending inspections, coordinates of hidden weaknesses, estimations of Zykar patrol routes. They were mapping their prison, not just its physical layout, but its very heartbeat. They were not just surviving. They were learning. And Captain Kaelen, in his absolute certainty of their defeat, was the most blind of all. The game had begun. A silent, deadly chess match where the pieces moved with agonizing slowness, and only one side knew they were even playing. The Aegis Contempt hummed with a renewed, almost imperceptible tension. Captain Kaelen observing the slight dips in mineral output, the minor delays in processing, and the intermittent malfunctions of automated systems, felt a flicker of irritation. Not alarm, not concern, but the annoyance of a meticulous engineer encountering persistent, inexplicable inefficiencies. He attributed it to the inherent frailty of the human workforce. It's their inability to maintain peak performance under the increased quotas. It was, he concluded, further proof of their inferiority. What he failed to grasp was the meticulous, almost surgical precision with which these inefficiencies were being orchestrated. The humans, driven by a silent collective will, had begun their true work. The geometric patterns, once mere messages, now became schematics. A specific sequence of taps on a pipe wasn't just a warning. It was a precise instruction for a microscopic stress fracture. Carefully timed stumble near a conveyor belt wasn't clumsiness. It was the deliberate introduction of a foreign contaminant. It's designed to subtly degrade the lubricant in a crucial gear. Their knowledge of the Zykar facility had become intimate, almost symbiotic. They understood the ebb and flow of its power grid, to precise moments when a localized power surge would be dismissed as a grid anomaly rather than an intentional diversion. They knew the chemical composition of the nutrient paste and how a minuscule, most untraceable enzyme, synthesized from a naturally occurring fungus found in the deeper mining tunnels, could subtly accelerate the corrosion of specific metallic alloys in the dispensing units. They were not fighting with fists and fury, but with the insidious patience of rust. The Zykar overseers, trained for brute force and overt control, remained oblivious. They saw the increased frequency of automated maintenance requests, the sporadic overheating of power conduits, the unexpected deterioration of certain structural components. They filed reports attributing them to the harsh environment of Vorlagnine, the age of the facility, or the inevitable wear and tear of continuous operation. Captain Kaelen, reviewing these reports, merely authorized more frequent maintenance cycles, more extensive drone inspections, and stricter oversight of human labor. The Zykar worldview, so focused on grand strategy and overwhelming power, blinded them to the microscopic war unfolding beneath their very feet. One particular Zykar, a junior officer named Throgon, harbored a nascent, unsettling suspicion. He was younger, less indoctrinated in the absolute certainty of Zykar superiority. He noticed the patterns in the malfunctions. A conveyor belt in Sector Gamma, failing precisely when the mining drone in Sector Beta experienced a power surge. A ventilation system in Level 4, sputtering just as the nutrient paste dispenser in Level 3 jammed. Coincidences? His superiors insisted. The Throgon saw a faint, almost imperceptible thread connecting them, like constellations in a starless sky. He voiced his concerns tentatively to Captain Kaelen, suggesting an internal sabotage. Kaelen dismissed him with a guttural laugh. Sabotage by humans? Their minds are as brittle as their bones, Throgon. They are broken things. Incapable of such intricate thought, Throgon chastened, retreated, but the unease remained, a tiny, persistent itch in his multifaceted mind. The humans, meanwhile, deepened their silent conspiracy. They exchanged information not just through touch and rhythm, but through the very objects they handled. A specific type of mineral placed in a particular orientation within a sorting bin could signify a new Zykar patrol route. A discarded tool left at a precise angle indicated a vulnerable junction in the ventilation system. Their communication was a ghost in the machine, invisible to the advanced Zykar sensors that scanned for overt rebellion, for weapon signatures, for anything that resembled a threat. They were a collective mind, operating with a terrifying, almost inhuman synchronization, born of shared suffering and a singular, unspoken goal. Their bodies were failing, their energy reserves depleted, but their minds, honed by desperation, were sharper than ever. They worked with a quiet intensity, each movement a calculated act, each breath a silent prayer for vengeance. They were no longer individuals. They were a single, intricate organism, each human a cell, performing its designated function in the grand, terrifying design. The Zykar, in their arrogance, had not just imprisoned bodies. They had inadvertently forged a weapon from the very essence of human resilience. Captain Kaelen, in a rare moment of introspection, found himself musing on the concept of underestimation. He had underestimated the initial human resistance. Assuming their primitive technology would crumble instantly, it had taken a full cycle of orbital bombardments to pacify Earth. A minor inconvenience, he had thought then. Now, observing the Aegis Contempt with its baffling minor malfunctions, he considered it again. Perhaps he had underestimated the durability of human weakness. They were like stubborn weeds, he mused, difficult to eradicate completely, even when their roots were severed. He ordered an even greater reduction in nutrient paste, a final definitive push to break their stubborn, fragile spirits. He wanted to see them scream, to hear them beg. He wanted proof that they were utterly, completely broken. And still, they remained silent, their eyes reflecting the sterile glow of their prison. Stillness that was not peace, but the terrifying calm before a storm. The persistent, microscopic sabotage, once dismissed as mere inefficiency, began to coalesce into a pattern of widespread systemic degradation. The Aegis Contempt, a fortress designed for unyielding control, started to groan under the strain. Automated transport lines, once smooth and ceaseless, now stuttered, their magnetic rails intermittently losing power, causing mineral carts to collide with jarring impacts. Environmental regulators struggled, their intricate filters clogging with an unknown corrosive residue, leading to localized atmospheric fluctuations that irritated the Zykar's delicate respiratory systems. Even the formidable energy gates, the very symbols of Zykar dominance, flickered with increasing frequency, their formidable energy fields momentarily dimming, only to surge back with an audible crackle. Captain Kaelen's irritation festered. His multifaceted eyes, usually cold and calculating, now held a glint of annoyance, like a master mechanic whose perfectly tuned engine developed an inexplicable, persistent cough. He convened his engineering and security officers, their chitinous forms arrayed before him in the sterile command center. He demanded explanations. Engineers blamed aging components, the extreme geological activity of Vorlagnine, and the constant stress of operation. The security officers pointed to human clumsiness, their inherent inability to operate complex machinery without causing damage. Not one of them dared to suggest what the junior officer Throgon had once whispered: sabotage. The very idea was anathema to their understanding of their captives. Kaelen accepted their explanations, though a flicker of doubt, quickly suppressed, stirred within him. He augmented their responses with his own conclusion. It was the inherent weakness of the human species, their inability to maintain the high standards of Zykar efficiency. He ordered even more drastic measures. Production quotas were not merely maintained, but increased further, pushing the limits of both the facility and its human workforce. Surveillance drones were recalibrated for even finer detail, scanning for any overt act of defiance. Punishments for perceived infractions became swifter, more severe, designed to crush any nascent spark of rebellion before it could ignite. Yet, the humans moved through this escalating brutality with an eerie, almost supernatural. Their bodies were emaciated, their eyes sunken, but their movements, though slow, possessed a deliberate grace. They now knew the facility better than its Zykar architects. They understood the thermal signatures of every conduit, the precise, resonant frequency of every structural support, the intricate dance of the Zykar's automated sentinels. Their silent language, a complex tapestry of taps, gestures, and seemingly random placements of objects, had evolved into a real-time operational map of Aegis Contempt. They exploited the Zykar's reliance on automation. It's a human, feigning exhaustion would collapse near a maintenance access panel, subtly dislodging a micro-regulator. Another, during a routine mineral transfer, would introduce a minuscule, specially cultivated bioluminescent moss into the ventilation system, designed to subtly corrode specific alloys over time, eventually leading to a complete system failure. They were not just causing malfunctions. They were creating cascading failures, meticulously designed to overwhelm the Zykar's repair capabilities and divert their attention from the true targets. Throgon, the junior officer, watched. His unease had blossomed into a quiet obsession. He spent his off-duty cycles reviewing historical facility data, cross-referencing malfunction reports with human work assignments. He noticed the inexplicable correlation, the subtle synchronicity that defied statistical probability. He saw the pattern in the accidents, the way they clustered around specific human work groups, even though there was no overt communication. He started observing the humans themselves, not just their labor, but their interactions, their subtle glances, the almost imperceptible movements of their hands. He still couldn't decipher their language, but he saw that a language existed, hidden in plain sight. He felt a chill, a deep, unsettling premonition that something far more complex than simple incompetence was at play. He approached Kaelen again, It's time with a compiled data slate, highlighting the statistical anomalies, Captain Throgan stated, his voice a low thrum. The probability of these incidents being random. It is mathematically negligible. There is a pattern, a coordination. Kaelen's multifaceted eyes narrowed, not in understanding, but in disdain. He swept the data slate aside with a dismissive gesture. Throgon, your analysis is flawed. You seek order where there is only chaos born of weakness. The humans are incapable of such strategic thought. Their minds are primitive, emotional. They break. They do not scheme. You are wasting resources on this fantasy. Focus on maintaining control, not chasing phantoms of human resilience. It is a concept invented by their pathetic propaganda, not a reality. Throgon retreated, his mandibles twitching in frustration. Kaelen's arrogance was a shield impenetrable to logic. But Throgon knew what he saw. He started to watch the humans even more closely, not as an overseer, but as a silent, detached observer, trying to break their code. He was looking for the obvious, for the overt signs of rebellion, still unable to comprehend the true nature of the silent, sophisticated war being waged around him. The humans, meanwhile, simply continued their work. Their faces etched with the exhaustion of ceaseless labor, their eyes holding that unsettling, unwavering stillness. They were building their trap, piece by agonizing piece, and their jailers were walking deeper into it with every passing cycle, blinded by their own contempt. The Aegis Contempt, once a monument to Zykar dominance, now resembled a gargantuan, dying beast. Its internal systems, meticulously designed for endless operation, were failing with alarming regularity. Power conduits, weakened by targeted micro-corrosion, flared and died, plunging entire sections of the facility into emergency lighting. Life support systems, their filters choked by the insidious biomass, struggled to maintain breathable atmosphere, forcing Zykar guards to activate personal environmental regulators, a humiliating concession. Even the automated defense turrets, vital for internal security, occasionally spun wildly, firing bursts of plasma into empty corridors before sputtering into silence. The Zykar, a species that prided itself on order and precision, found their fortress descending into unpredictable chaos. Captain Kaelen's arrogance, once an impenetrable shield, began to crack. He paced his command center, his multifaceted eyes darting across flickering holographic displays. His guttural pronouncements, once imbued with cold authority, now carried an edge of frantic desperation. He barked orders, demanding immediate repairs, comprehensive system diagnostics, and the relentless pursuit of any Zykar engineer who failed to rectify the deepening crisis. Refused, absolutely refused, to entertain the notion that the humans, these frail, broken creatures, could be responsible. He blamed faulty manufacturing, unforeseen geological stresses, even minor solar flares from the distant green giant. Anything but the truth that gnawed at the periphery of his consciousness. Throgon, the junior officer, had become a shadow, moving silently through the failing facility. Its internal sensors tuned not to Zykar frequencies, but to the almost imperceptible rhythms of human activity. He had identified the geometric patterns. He had seen them etched into the dust, scratched onto the walls of desolate passages, subtly formed by stacked nutrient paste containers. He still couldn't decipher their meaning. But he now understood their purpose. They were a code, a language. And more critically, he had observed the patterns of their creation. A human, feigning a sudden coughing fit, would tap a sequence on a metallic pipe. Moments later, another human, a sector away, would respond with a precisely timed, identical sequence delivered through the rhythmic scraping of a broom against the floor. This was no random occurrence. It was a conversation, a silent symphony of sabotage. He recorded it all, tirelessly, meticulously, compiling a mountain of evidence that screamed coordinated attack. His data slate, once dismissed, now contained irrefutable statistical anomalies, proving a deliberate, intelligent hand behind every malfunction. He cross-referenced the unique signatures of the biomass with the human work shifts in specific ventilation shafts. He mapped the precise timing of power surges with the subtle acts of electrical tampering he had observed. The picture emerging was terrifying in its cold, its calculating precision. He presented his findings to Kaelen a third time, his voice devoid of deference, filled instead with the urgency of a looming catastrophe. Captain Throgon projected, his data slate displaying a holographic overlay of the facility, crisscrossed with lines connecting accidents into a terrifying web. This is not wear and tear. This is a deliberate, highly sophisticated campaign. The humans, they are orchestrating this. They are using a language we do not understand, but it is undeniably present. He pointed to a pattern of recurring energy. Dipset always preceded a specific type of structural stress fracture. These are not random, Captain. They are designed. Kaelen stared at the holographic projection, his multifaceted eyes wide, not with comprehension, but with a horrifying realization of his own misjudgment. For a fleeting moment, a microcycle of doubt, his arrogant certainty wavered. The proof was before him, cold and undeniable. But the Zykar psyche, so deeply invested in its own superiority, recoiled from such a monstrous admission. To admit that these soft, primitive creatures had outmaneuvered him, a Zykar captain, a veteran of countless conquests, was an impossibility. It was a wound to his very being. His mandibles clicked, a sound of contained fury. "Throgon," he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You insult the Dominion. You insult me. This is delusion. You are seeing ghosts where there are only broken slaves, or obsession has clouded your judgment. These are desperate, random acts of frustration, nothing more." Or perhaps Kaelen leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. "You have been compromised? Is your loyalty to the Dominion wavering, Throgon?" Throgon flinched, but held his ground. "My loyalty is to the truth, Captain. And the truth is, we are being dismantled from within. They are not broken. They are evolving," Kaelen roared, a sound that vibrated through the command center. "Silence. You are relieved of duty, Throgon. Confined to your quarters. Well, not have such treasonous fantasy infecting my command." He turned to his remaining officers, his voice regaining a semblance of its former authority, though tinged with desperation. "Increase patrols, double human guard details. Any perceived infraction, any deviation from protocol, is to be met with immediate, overwhelming force. Break them all. The facility will be restored to full function, and this insubordination will cease." But even as Kaelen issued his furious orders, the lights in the command center flickered ominously, then dimmed, plunging the room into a momentary, unsettling gloom before the emergency generators kicked in with a groan. The Zykar officers exchanged uneasy glances. The beast was truly dying, its final struggles growing more violent. And the humans, in their silent, emaciated state, continued their work, their eyes holding that terrifying, unwavering stillness, a stillness that was now less resignation and more the terrifying calm of a predator about to spring its trap. Captain Kaelen's fury, once a contained storm, now raged unchecked through the Aegis Contempt. Throgon, confined to his quarters, became a silent, damning testament to Kaelen's refusal to see. The captain, convinced that the growing chaos was merely the last gasps of a broken species, doubled down on his brutality. Guards, now operating under a directive of zero tolerance for inefficiency, moved with an even harsher zeal. Floggings in the common areas became commonplace. The crack of energy whips echoing through the cavernous halls. Nutrient-paced rations were further slashed, plunging the human population into the edge of starvation. Kaelen wanted to see screams. He wanted to see total, abject surrender, but he heard only the hollow thud of their emaciated bodies hitting the floor, the ragged gasps of their exhausted lungs. The humans endured, their eyes still holding that unsettling stillness, now deepened by a grim, terrifying resolve. Their silent conspiracy, once a whisper, had become a roaring torrent, flowing through the very veins of the facility. The escalating Zykar brutality, far from breaking them, only refined their methods. Every punishment, every reduction in rations, was simply more data. More proof of their captors' predictable, arrogant nature. The Aegis Contempt was no longer merely malfunctioning, was actively collapsing around its Zykar occupants. Major structural supports, weakened by months of targeted resonant frequency vibrations, began to groan, sending tremors through the moon's crust. Entire sections of the geothermal mines experienced localized cave-ins, not violent explosions, but slow, deliberate collapses that trapped automated mining drones and diverted Zykar repair crews into treacherous, unstable tunnels. The main power conduit, the very lifeline of the facility, now flickered with alarming regularity, its energy output dropping by critical percentages, triggering cascading failures across multiple systems. The Zykar, accustomed to a perfectly controlled environment, found themselves increasingly disoriented. Their internal chronometers, linked to the failing power grid, began to desynchronize, throwing off patrol schedules and work shifts. Communication arrays, compromised by subtle electromagnetic interference, crackled with static, making command and control a frustrating, intermittent struggle. Zykar guards, once confident and imposing, now moved with an edgy paranoia. Their multifaceted eyes, constantly scanning for the next inexplicable malfunction, the next phantom threat. They blamed the humans, not for sabotage, but for being too weak, too clumsy, too human to operate a Zykar facility. It was, for Kaelen, the ultimate irony. Their perceived weakness was dismantling him. The humans, in their silent, emaciated state, observed their jailer's descent into chaos. They moved with a chilling synchronization, each action a precise, calculated blow. Human, feigning a sudden, violent coughing fit near a central cooling vent, would subtly release a concentrated burst of bioluminescent moss specifically cultivated to target the delicate optical sensors of the automated turrets. Moments later, those turrets would spin blindly, firing wildly into the rock, consuming precious energy and drawing Zykar attention. Another, seemingly attempting to clear a clogged waste disposal unit, would instead subtly reroute nutrient paste lines, diverting vital sustenance to a hidden makeshift reservoir, slowly accumulating a meager but critical supply for the coming push. They were not just destroying, they were shaping. Every malfunction, every diverted resource, every disrupted patrol route was a brushstroke in a master plan. They were creating pathways, bottlenecks, and blind spots. They were isolating sections of the facility, preparing to cut off specific Zykar forces. They were gathering the scattered remnants of their own strength, hoarding every calorie, every moment of rest, for the inevitable moment. The Zykar, in their rigid adherence to protocol, their inability to adapt to the unseen enemy, became predictable in their very unpredictability. Captain Kaelen, isolated in his spiraling paranoia, issued an order that would prove his ultimate undoing. Convinced that the humans were merely inefficient, not malicious, he commanded the complete shutdown of the primary atmospheric regulators in the human containment sectors for a full standard cycle. It's a brutal measure designed to force total submission. The air would grow thin, the pressure would drop, and their fragile human bodies would finally break, gasping for breath. He believed this would extinguish the last ember of their resilience. What he failed to understand was that the humans had already factored this in. Their subtle sabotage had, for weeks, been diverting excess oxygen and filtering agents into hidden, makeshift reserves within the very ventilation systems Kaelen now sought to weaponize. The geometric patterns etched into the walls had already communicated the precise timing of this very command. As the air grew thin, the humans, though struggling, would draw on these hidden reserves, their bodies pushed to the brink, but their minds still sharp, still calculating, still in control. Kaelen, in his boundless contempt, had handed them the very mechanism for their survival, and unknowingly, the key to his own destruction. The stage was set, the beast was weakened, and the silent, patient predators were ready. The air in the human containment sectors grew thin, acrid, pressing down on their lungs like an invisible weight. Captain Kaelen's cruel command, designed to suffocate their spirit, instead ignited a furious, silent resolve. Their bodies, already pushed to the brink of starvation and exhaustion, convulsed with racking coughs, but their eyes, through the haze of oxygen deprivation, remained clear, focused. This was the final test, the ultimate crucible, and they were ready. The geometric patterns, now etched into every surface imaginable, pulsated with urgency. They were no longer just schematics or messages. They were countdowns, precise instructions, for the coordinated execution of their grand design. The hidden oxygen reserves, painstakingly siphoned and stored, provided just enough reprieve, a precious few hours of clarity in the suffocating darkness. To execute the next phase, while the humans gasped for air, the Aegis Contempt groaned. Under its death throes, major power conduits, already compromised, now suffered complete, catastrophic failures, plunging entire sectors into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting, itself failing, cast eerie, shifting shadows that danced with the Zykar's growing panic. Automated security systems, designed to be omnipresent, sputtered into silence. Their intricate sensor nets collapsing, leaving gaping, unseen holes in the facility's defenses. The Zykar, accustomed to unassailable technological superiority, found themselves blind, deaf, and increasingly isolated. Their multifaceted eyes, optimized for high-resolution visual input, struggled in the deepening gloom. Their communication arrays, already unreliable, now became static choked ruins, cutting off commanders from their units and units from each other. It's panic, a concept alien to the rigidly disciplined Zykar, began to ripple through their ranks. They were trapped in their own failing fortress, surrounded by an unseen enemy that moved with terrifying, phantom-like precision. Captain Kaelen, now truly alone in his command center, watched his displays die, one by one. The holographic map of Aegis Contempt, once a vibrant tapestry of operational efficiency, was now a dead black screen. His direct communication channels to his officers crackled with incoherent static, then fell silent. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sporadic groans of the dying facility and the frantic worry of his personal life support unit, struggling to compensate for the failing atmospheric regulators in his own command center. His arrogance had curdled into a cold, paralyzing fear. He had dismissed Thragen, had mocked the concept of human resilience, and now, the very weakness he scorned was consuming his empire from within. Thragen, released from his quarters by the cascading system failures that unlocked his cell, moved through the darkened corridors with a chilling sense of vindication. He saw the systematic nature of the collapse, the precise, almost artistic way in which the humans had dismantled the facility. He saw the deactivated turrets, their optical sensors subtly melted from within by the biomass. He saw the power conduits, not exploded, but meticulously shorted in specific sequences. He understood now, this was not chaos. It was a symphony of destruction, orchestrated by minds he had once dismissed as primitive. The humans began to move. Not in a frantic, uncoordinated rush, but with the disciplined precision of a well-oiled machine. They knew the layout of the facility better than the Zykar themselves. The geometric patterns, their silent language, had not only mapped the Zykar's weaknesses, but had also charted the humans' escape routes, their rendezvous points, and their targets. They navigated the darkened tunnels, the collapsed sections, and the failing life support zones with a chilling familiarity. Each step was deliberate, each movement a continuation of the silent war they had waged for months. Their objective was not escape, not yet. Their objective was retribution. They moved towards the Zykar Guard barracks, towards the central armory, towards the command center itself. They were gaunt, starved, and gasping for air, but their spirits, forged in the crucible of Vorlignine, burned with an infernal, unquenchable fire. They were no longer merely survivors. They were agents of vengeance, moving through the dying heart of the Zykar's contempt. Captain Kaelen, isolated and terrified, heard the distant sounds now. Not the familiar hum of machinery, but the scuff of boots on metal, the soft, rhythmic breathing of something moving through the darkness. Its internal sensors registered faint, irregular heat signatures, too small to be Zykar, too numerous to be coincidence. He fumbled for his sidearm, his mandibles clicking nervously. The silence of the dying facility was now punctuated by the soft, steady advance of his doom. He had mocked human resilience, and now that very resilience was knocking at his door, a silent, implacable force that he, in his arrogance, had helped to forge. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey, once broken, now moved with the terrifying precision of a sharpened blade. The Aegis Contempt became a labyrinth of shadows and groaning metal. The Zykar, whose multifaceted eyes were accustomed to the sterile, uniform illumination of their technological empire, found themselves plunged into a disorienting, suffocating darkness. Their internal chronometers screamed conflicting data. Their communication links sputtered into silence. The familiar hum of their life support systems was replaced by the guttural wheezing of dying machinery. Panic, a corrosive emotion Zykar society had systematically eradicated from its collective consciousness, began to spread like an invasive blight. Zykar guards, once towering figures of unyielding authority, now stumbled through the gloom. There, heavy chitinous armor clanking against the buckled deck plates. Their plasma rifles, usually held with unwavering precision, swept erratically. Their targeting systems blinded by the pervasive electromagnetic interference the humans had meticulously cultivated. They barked commands into dead cums. There, voices raw with a fear they could not comprehend. They were hunters caught in their own snare, blinded by the very prey they had so utterly dismissed. The humans moved through this chaos, the chilling precision of wraiths. Their gaunt frames, once symbols of weakness, were now perfectly suited for the confined, crumbling passages. Their eyes, accustomed to the dim light of the mines, saw patterns in the shadows, felt the subtle vibrations of Zykar movement through the deck. They were a collective consciousness, moving with a synchronized lethality that transcended individual strength. There were no battle cries, no shouts of defiance, only the soft, rhythmic scuff of their worn boots, the controlled exhalation of breath, and the almost inaudible click of improvised tools. Their first targets were the isolated patrol units. Zykar Guard, disoriented by a sudden, localized power surge, would stumble, only to find a shadow detach itself from the wall. There was no struggle, no prolonged fight, just a swift, brutal strike to a vulnerable joint, a precise severing of a neural cluster, an application of overwhelming, targeted force. The Zykar would fall, a heavy thud in the darkness, their life support systems hissing briefly before going silent. The humans melted back into the shadows, leaving behind only the chilling emptiness where a formidable warrior had once stood. Captain Kaelen, lone in his command center, heard the distant sounds, the muffled thuds, the occasional metallic clang, the brief, strangled hiss of a dying Zykar. He strained his multifaceted eyes, staring at the dead holographic displays, willing them to flicker back to life, to offer some explanation, some rationalization for the terror closing in around him. He activated his personal short-range comm, desperate to reach any surviving unit. Only static answered, a mocking, relentless hiss that echoed the sound of his dying fortress. He had mocked human resilience. He had seen their suffering as weakness, their silence as surrender. Now that suffering had been transmuted into a weapon, and that silence was the sound of his doom. He thought of Thragan, the junior officer he had dismissed, confined, punished, for daring to speak the truth. A bitter, acidic taste filled Kaelen's mandibles. He had been so certain, so utterly, arrogantly certain. The humans were not seeking glorious combat. They were seeking efficient, strategic dismantling. They knew the Zykar preferred to fight in formation, in brightly lit, open spaces where their superior weaponry and armor could be leveraged. The humans denied them this. They lured them into narrow maintenance tunnels, into collapsed sections, into areas where the Zykar's size and reliance on technology became liabilities. They used the pervasive darkness, the fluctuating atmosphere, the very decay of Aegis Contempt as their allies. One Zykar patrol, responding to a phantom distress. Signal found themselves trapped in a maintenance shaft, their heavy armor snagging on fallen debris. From above, through a compromised ventilation. Great. A silent rain of corrosive biomass descended, melting their optical sensors, blinding them in an instant. Then, from the darkness below, the humans emerged, moving with terrifying speed. There. Improvised bladed tools, finding the gaps in the Zykar armor, striking with cold, practiced precision. The Zykar roared in frustrated agony, firing wildly into the dark, but their blasts found only empty air. One by one, they fell. Kaelen felt a tremor vibrate through the deck plates of his command center. It wasn't a structural collapse. It was the rhythmic, synchronized footsteps of multiple beings approaching. The sound, once unheard, now filled the dying fortress, a silent drumbeat of vengeance. He clutched his sidearm, its familiar weight offering little comfort. His crew, the mighty Zykar, were paying the price, and the humans, once the weakest, most broken of his captives, were the relentless, unseen force collecting it. The master of the Aegis Contempt was trapped, cornered, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. The Aegis Contempt became a tomb, its once formidable defenses now turned against its creators. The Zykar, trapped within their own crumbling fortress, found their instincts honed for open warfare and technological superiority. Useless in this suffocating, pitch-black labyrinth, the humans, their gaunt forms moving like predatory shadows, systematically purged the facility. They didn't engage in prolonged firefights. They struck with surgical precision, exploiting every blind spot, every power fluctuation, every moment. Zykar disorientation, a Zykar engineering team, attempting a desperate repair on a failing life support system, found their tools subtly tampered with, their power conduits shorting out. As sparks flew and their multifaceted eyes struggled to adjust, the shadows moved. A precise cut to a vital joint, a swift disablement of a neural network, and the engineers fell. Their heavy bodies clanging against the deck, the humans stripped. Them of their sidearms, their utility tools, their units, then vanished, leaving only the chilling silence. Another squad of Zykar, attempting to regroup in a dimly lit common area, suddenly found the floor beneath them vibrating with a resonant frequency that caused their internal equilibrium to reel. Their advanced sensory organs, overwhelmed by the sonic assault, left them momentarily paralyzed, their limbs twitching uncontrollably. Before their systems could adapt, the humans were upon them, not with brute force, but with a horrifying efficiency. Their improvised bladed tools sharpened on the very rocks of Vorlag 9. Found the vulnerable points in the Zykar's armor, the soft tissue beneath the joints, the exposed conduits of their life support packs. The Zykar died not in glorious combat, but in a silent, disoriented collapse. Captain Kaelen, isolated in his dying command center, heard the thuds, the guttural gurgles, the brief, strangled cries of his crew. Each sound was a hammer blow to his once unbreakable arrogance. He had believed the humans incapable of such sophisticated, coordinated action. He had seen them as nothing more than cattle, their suffering a means to an end. Now that suffering had forged them into something terrifyingly efficient, something utterly alien to his understanding of warfare. He felt a primal, gnawing fear, a sensation he had never before experienced. He attempted to activate the facility's last resort, the automated self-destruct sequence, but the controls were unresponsive. The core protocols compromised by the widespread system failures. He tried to override the locking mechanisms on his personal escape pod, but the bay doors remained sealed, jammed by invisible forces. He was trapped, a king in his crumbling castle, watching his kingdom fall, piece by agonizing piece. His multifaceted eyes darted around the command center, now lit only by the faint, sputtering glow of emergency lights. He saw the empty chairs of his officers, their units silent, their data slates dead. He was alone, utterly, irrevocably alone. The silence that had once been the human's prison was now his own. The Zykar, in their contempt, had believed themselves superior in every conceivable way. They had brought overwhelming force, advanced technology, and ruthless efficiency. But the humans had brought something else, an unbreakable will, honed by the pain of loss and the agony of subjugation. They had learned to weaponize their weakness, to turn the Zykar's strengths into liabilities. Their small size allowed them to navigate compromised spaces, where low energy signatures made them ghosts to Zykar sensors. Their ability to endure suffering had given them the patience to dismantle a fortress, brick by agonizing brick, A new sound permeated the dying facility, a rhythmic, almost imperceptible thump thump thump, growing steadily louder. It was the synchronized footfalls of the humans, not running, not charging, but advancing with a chilling, deliberate pace. They were coming for him. Kaelen raised his plasma sidearm, its power cell indicator flickering ominously. His mandibles clicked, not in amusement now, but in a dry, rasping sound of utter despair. He looked at the dead holographic displays, at the blackness where the map of his domain once pulsed with light. He saw a faint, almost imperceptible geometric pattern etched into the metal frame of the console. A pattern he had dismissed countless times as meaningless. Now, in the terrifying silence, it seemed to pulse with a malevolent intelligence. It was a message, he realized, too late. A message of defiance, written in the very language he had scorned. He, Captain Kaelen, conqueror of worlds, was about to be undone by the quiet, methodical vengeance of the species he had mocked. The silence thickened, pregnant with the approaching storm. The rhythmic thump-thump grew louder, a chilling, deliberate cadence that resonated through the failing superstructure of Aegis Contempt. It was the sound of coordinated human footsteps, not the frantic scramble of a desperate escape, but the measured advance of an implacable force. Captain Kaelen, isolated in his dead command center, felt each thud reverberate in his very exoskeleton, a drumbeat of doom. The silence between the thuds was even more terrifying, pregnant with unseen movement, the ghost of a species he had dismissed as broken. He had heard tales, whispered in the lower ranks, ancient Terran myths, predators that stalked their prey in silence, not with roars and displays of power, but with patience and precision. He had dismissed them as primitive fables. Now he was living one. The humans were not a mob. They were a singular, living organism, moving with an eerie synchronization that defied their individual frailties. The last Zykar Guard patrols, disoriented by the pervasive darkness and the crumbling infrastructure, had ceased transmitting. Kaelen knew what that meant. He had trained his forces to never abandon their posts, to transmit until their final breath. The silence was absolute. His crew, the elite warriors of the Zykar Dominion, had paid the price for his contempt, dismantled. Not by overwhelming firepower, but by something far more insidious. The weaponization of their own environment, turned against them by the very creatures they had enslaved. A low, grating sound echoed from the corridor outside the command centers. Reinforced door? Kaelen's multifaceted eyes, wide with a terror he had never thought possible, fixed on the entrance. He knew the sound was the precise, methodical grinding of a cutting tool. Not a Zykar one, but something crude, improvised, yet terrifyingly effective. They were breaching the door, slowly, deliberately. They were not rushing. They were savoring this moment. His sidearm, a formidable plasma caster, felt suddenly inadequate. A child's toy against the unseen, unstoppable force on the other side. He had believed in his superior technology, his superior strength, his superior intellect, all rendered meaningless by patience, by ingenuity, by a will forged in the fires of unimaginable suffering. He had mocked human resilience. He had seen their suffering and attributed it to weakness. Kay now understood, with a sickening clarity, that their suffering had been their crucible, forging them into something tougher, sharper, more dangerous than any Zykar warrior. He remembered the young human in the medical bay, his legs shattered, subtly tracing patterns on the bed. He remembered the quiet compliance, the unsettling stillness in their eyes. He had dismissed it as the dullness of despair. It was the focus of a predator. He had seen the minute deviations in the compound purity, the slight misplacements of tools, the almost imperceptible fungi in the ventilation systems. He had attributed them to sloppiness, to human error. They were strokes of a masterpiece, a silent, deadly symphony of sabotage. The grating sound intensified, accompanied by faint, almost inaudible whispers, not words, but rhythmic breaths. The soft scuff of a boot, the click of metal against metal. They were communicating. Even now, through the thick, reinforced door, they were coordinating their breach. Their final approach, Kaelen felt a cold, clammy dread grip his internal organs. He had been a conqueror. He had burned worlds, enslaved populations, extended the Dominion's iron grip across countless star systems. He had never known fear, not like this. This was the fear of the prey, cornered, stripped of all defenses. Facing an enemy that understood him better than he understood himself, the Zykar believed in overwhelming force. The humans believed in breaking the system from within, and they had succeeded. The reinforced door groaned, a deep, metallic shriek, as a section of its inner locking mechanism gave way. A hairline crack, barely visible, appeared in the dense neutronium, and through it, a sliver of deeper, unsettling darkness. Kaelen stumbled backward, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the crack. He raised his plasma caster, its energy cell sputtering, its targeting beam wavering. It was ready to unleash a torrent of plasma, to sell his life dearly. But there was no surge, no sudden rush. The grating sound paused. The silence returned, deeper, more suffocating than before. They were waiting. They were letting the terror build. They were letting him understand, truly understand, the depth of his miscalculation. It was a psychological torment more potent than any physical assault. They wanted him to witness the total unraveling of his empire, his fortress, and his sanity. Before they delivered the final blow, he saw it all, suddenly, clearly. His entire crew, every Zykar in Aegis Contempt, had paid the price. They had been dismantled, piece by piece, their bodies falling in the darkness. Their last moments filled with confusion and the terrifying realization that they had been outmaneuvered by the very beings they scorned. And now, it was his turn. The crack in the door widened, slowly, inexorably, revealing nothing but impenetrable blackness. The silence held, thick with the promise of inevitable, precise vengeance. The reinforced door to Captain Kaelen's command center groaned, then peeled inward with a drawn-out, agonizing shriek of tortured metal. It didn't blast open. It wasn't forced by brute strength. It was carefully, precisely cut, its inner mechanisms dismantled with chilling expertise. Through the opening, a deeper, more profound darkness spilled into the already dim chamber. No charging figures, no triumphant shouts, just the oppressive silence. Then, from the inky blackness, a figure emerged. Not a towering Zykar warrior, but a human, emaciated, gaunt, its clothes tattered and stained, its skin pale from months without natural light. But its eyes, those eyes, once filled with the dullness of suffering, now burned with an incandescent, terrifying clarity. It was the same human Kaelen had seen in the medical bay, the one with the shattered leg. It's one he had dismissed as a broken, dying creature. Its leg, though still bearing scars, was healed, strengthened by the very resources Kaelen had unknowingly provided through diverted nutrient paste. Behind the first human, others materialized from the gloom, their forms indistinct, their movements fluid and silent. They were not an army in any conventional sense. They were a collective of ghosts, of shadows, moving with an almost supernatural unity. Their faces, though ravaged by privation, bore no expression of triumph or rage. They had grim, unwavering resolve. They were the embodiment of the stillness Kaelen had so profoundly misunderstood. Captain Kaelen, his plasma caster shaking in his hand, found his voice caught in his throat. He had envisioned a final, glorious stand, a last, desperate act of defiance. But this was not a battle. This was an execution. And he was the condemned. His multifaceted eyes darted between the silent figures, searching for an opening, a weakness, anything he could exploit. But there was none. They were a wall of silent, unwavering vengeance. The lead human, the one from the medical bay, moved forward, not rushing, but walking with a slow, deliberate cadence. It held no weapon, only its raw, blistered hands, still bearing the faint marks of the geometric patterns. Kaelen raised his plasma caster, its charge indicator flickering dangerously low. A T fired. A sputtering burst of plasma arced through the air, missing the human by a wide margin, impacting the wall behind it with a shower of sparks. The human didn't flinch. It didn't even acknowledge the shot. It simply continued its slow, inexorable advance. Kaelen fired again and again, each shot weaker than the last, till the plasma caster clicked empty, its energy cell fully depleted. He stared at the useless weapon in his hand, then at the advancing human, a profound, chilling realization washing over him. They had known. They had known his weapon's charge, its limitations. They had known everything. The human stopped just a few paces from Kaelen. Its gaze, steady and unwavering, pierced through his arrogance, through his fear, directly into the core of his being. There was no hatred in those eyes, no overt malice, only an ancient, profound understanding of suffering, and the cold, unyielding will forged from it. Kaelen felt a chill, deeper than the failing life support could account for. He had mocked human resilience. He had believed them weak, pliable, easily broken. He had dismissed their silent suffering as surrender. He saw now, in the unwavering gaze of this single human, the true nature of their strength. It was not in their physical might, nor their technology, but in their capacity to endure, to adapt, to turn their pain into purpose. The human slowly extended a hand, not in aggression, but in an almost ritualistic gesture. Its fingers, scarred and calloused, bore the faint indelible marks of the geometric patterns, a silent testament to the months of planning, communication, of collective suffering. Kaelen stared at the hand, then at the unwavering eyes. Oh, he understood. This was the price. The Zykar Dominion, in its boundless arrogance, had created its own undoing. They had mocked human resilience, and now their entire crew, their entire fortress, had paid the price. And Kaelen, the architect of their suffering, was about to pay the ultimate one. The silence in the command center was absolute, save for the faint, ragged breathing of Captain Kaelen, the last Zykar to the human scarred hand, etched with the silent language of their suffering, extended towards Captain Kaelen. This wasn't a gesture of violence, but of cold, unyielding purpose. Kaelen, his plasma caster useless, his multifaceted eyes wide, with a terror that clawed at his very being, could only stare. He saw no hatred in the human's gaze, only an ancient, terrible stillness, a reflection of the void that now consumed his fortress. The human's fingers, calloused from mining, precise from months of meticulous sabotage, did not strike. Instead, they brushed against the main console of the command center, a light, almost imperceptible touch. A single, faint pulse of energy, precisely calibrated, flowed from the human's hand. Through the compromised circuitry of the console, deep into the dying heart of Aegis Contempt, Kaelen's internal sensors shrieked. A sudden catastrophic surge of power. Not a destructive overload, but a controlled, focused redirection. The Zykar's own power grid, once a tool of their dominion, was now a weapon wielded against them. The Zykar's primary communication array. The massive, long-range transmitter that had once broadcast orders across light years flickered. Then, with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through Kaelen's very bones, it flared to life, but it was not broadcasting Zykar commands. It was broadcasting a signal, raw and primal, yet structured with a terrifying precision. A signal that had been meticulously assembled over months, piece by agonizing piece. From the very data streams and ambient noise of Aegis Contempt, it was the geometric patterns translated into a universal frequency. 'Twas the rhythmic taps, the subtle hums, the precise timing of their silent rebellion, now amplified and beamed across the galaxy. The signal was not a plea for help. It was a declaration, a testament. It contained no words, no images, no Zykar data. It was a complex, multi-layered data packet encoded with the precise schematics of Zykar technology. It's detailing every weakness, every vulnerability, every exploitable flaw the humans had painstakingly discovered within the Aegis Contempt. It was a master key, a blueprint for dismantling the Zykar's own technology from within, shared with any nascent species, any struggling resistance, any distant world that might one day receive it. Kaelen understood then. The Zykar Dominion had prided itself on its unassailable technological superiority, its rigid adherence to protocol. The humans, in their suffering, had learned to exploit that very rigidity. They had learned the Zykar's technology better than the Zykar themselves, not to build, but to unravel. The Aegis Contempt was not merely a prison, it was a giant, unwitting transmitter, now broadcasting the very means of the Zykar's undoing across the galactic arm. His entire crew had paid the price. Every Zykar in the facility, from the lowliest drone to the most elite guard, had been systematically, silently neutralized. Not in a glorious, defiant battle, but by the insidious, meticulous, almost academic application of sabotage. They had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, utterly dismantled by the very vermin they had mocked. The Zykar captain, the conqueror of worlds, felt his internal systems begin to fail. Not from a physical wound, but from a cascade of systemic shock, a profound, irreversible breakdown of his core functions. The atmospheric regulators in his suit, subtly compromised by the human's touch on the console, began to sputter. Neural interface, overwhelmed by the sudden, massive data transfer, overloaded. He collapsed, his heavy chitinous form hitting the deck with a hollow clang. He lay there, twitching, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the blank dead screen of his command console, silently broadcasting the blueprint for the Zykar's downfall. The humans, their faces still grim, their movements still silent, watched him fall. There was no cheer, no celebration. It's only the quiet satisfaction of a terrible justice served. They had endured unimaginable suffering, had lost everything, but they had refused to break. It turned their pain into a weapon, their weakness into strength, and their silence into a roar that would echo across the stars. The Zykar Dominion, vast and arrogant, would soon receive a message. Not from a conquered people, but from a resurgent force forged in the crucible of their own contempt. The Aegis Contempt became a beacon. It's a monument not to Zykar power, but to human resilience. The Zykar had mocked human resilience. Its entire crew had paid the price. And now, the galaxy would know what humanity, broken and beaten, was truly capable of. The Great Silence was over. A new era, born of vengeance and an unbreakable will, had begun.